Over the summer, I released a video of my Japan pickups. And quite surprisingly, I found myself in Japan again about a month ago. My wife had some things to do over there and asked me to join her, so I figured why not. And I had some ample game hunting time, so I wanted to do a follow-up Japan Pickups version 2. What did I get over there? And we're going to start with, if you've been following the channel, you know me, all of the magazines. I love the Japanese newsstands. I feel like they have some incredible magazines. So we have Famitsu, always have to pick that up. Perhaps not the latest edition of Nintendo Dream, although maybe it is January 2025, but it was on the newsstands back in November. Did a lot of train travel, so I picked up this line guide for JR East, just as a kind of memory, and New Type, and of course Animage. I'm a big fan of art books, and I decided to pick up this Persona 5 art book, which I have to admit I didn't quite know exactly what this was. This is not the Persona 5 kind of massive art book, the art collection. This is just a bunch of, I think, story scenes kind of going over the narrative of Persona 5. Nonetheless, I think it is worthy to add to my collection. Alright, so let's get into the games. I have a stack of games, and I'm going to start with these Game Boy Advance games. Picked up F-Zero and F-Zero. I just assumed this was the SNES version of F-Zero, but it seems to be a little bit different. Really enjoyed it. And then we have what is essentially Mario Golf. Classic game. I think it works well in the handheld form factor. These boxes are in pretty good condition, so I was happy about that. And this is Dodgeball, a kind of Atlas dodgeball game. Kind of like the River City Ransom sports games, to be quite honest. It's just really a fun kind of diversion. I haven't really dived into it too much. Going to go into some Switch games. Some of them I did not open yet. This is the Sunsoft collection, and I think this has 3 like Famicom Sunsoft games. Wanted to pick it up because I always like to support these sorts of compilations, but I have not had a chance to play it yet. And then we have Sushi Shot, I believe this is, and this was released actually on the last day that I was there. I found it in Akihabara in a hobby shop, and it was pretty cheap. It was maybe like 2,500 yen. But yeah, it's basically kind of like a puzzle game. I'm going to have to give that a shot. This game, The Great Mission, this is interesting. It seems to be like a kind of game show, and you're a contestant amongst many, and you're sort of running around and picking up coins and avoiding some secret agents or police officers. Not great. There's some element of it that I'm missing. There's a pretty strong language barrier, but it's an interesting concept. This is a game I was surprised by. It is Kill la Kill the game, and it is a fighting game. It has a pretty interesting art style. I would say it's kind of like one of the Fate Unlimited Code Capcom fighters, in the sense that it's 3D-ish. It's not full 3D like Tekken, but it's close enough. It seems to have a really in-depth story, like you're watching 5-minute-long movies before each fight in the story mode. I'm not familiar with the show that this is based on, so all of that was a little lost on me. But it's a pretty decent fighting game, so it was pretty cheap. It was, I think, a good pickup. And here we have Powerful Pros 2024-2025. This is 30th Anniversary Edition. I got the special edition with the Otani cover. And I know sports games don't get a lot of love, but this is always a classic. It's a sort of the chibi-style baseball game, and I've had a love-hate relationship with this series. I always thought it was unnecessarily difficult. I never liked the Konami approach to baseball games where you have sort of the outline of the bat hovering over the strike zone and it disappears and the strike zone disappears. Nonetheless, I think it's actually gotten better on the Switch. I played, there's a very cheap version floating around on the US eShop, and my wife picked up a version of this on one of her trips over to Japan. It was a Japan-only release. And this is a Japan-only release as well. I don't think they put this out over here. But I feel like the game engine has gotten better. It's a smooth 60 frames per second game, and it's a little bit more forgiving. There's a ton to do here. This was previously kind of like Konami esports type stuff. If you've played the soccer game, I forget what it's called, Pro Evolution Soccer, they sort of moved in that direction. They brought this back to a very full kind of single-player game. A lot of scenario modes, RPG modes, things like that. So I've played a couple games in this, and there's a bit of a language barrier if you want to do the RPG stuff, but I'm going to see if I can get into that. Then we have Metallic Child. This is kind of like a, well, it says roguelite core action. I think that's kind of what it is. It's like a, I don't know, it has like a gauntlet feel to it. Pretty solid. Pretty cheap. It would, nothing crazy, but it doesn't have that much of a language barrier. So if you like that sort of isometric run and gun, it's not a bad import. Then we have the IRM Collection Volume 1. I don't know if they released this on PC or not. I think I have this on some digital storefront, so I have to look at that. But it just seemed like it was very cheap, and I decided, well, let me pick it up on the Switch. Next game here is Evil West. My buddy Jay Shy recommended this game. It's getting pretty hard to find here in the States, but it's a great import because it is just, you put it in and it's completely in English. I guess the PS5 recognizes your region, just switches it to English. As far as the game itself, it kind of reminds me of Gungrave, sort of a corridor-based, over-the-top action shooter, sort of Wild West meets vampire, so again, interesting one. I've played through the first couple of missions, and it's a good time. Next up, we have Bomberman Land. I love Bomberman. I always try to pick up some Bomberman games, but this one has a big language barrier, very big language barrier. So I have not actually made it through to the Bomberman gameplay. I just couldn't spend any more time with it, kind of going through the story mode. So I was really happy with this pickup. This is the Rockman Dash value pack on the PSP. It has the two classic Rockman games, or Mega Man Legends games, I should say. And I really enjoy the concept of Mega Man Legends. It's just a little hard to play these days. Graphics are a little bit outdated. The control scheme is outdated, although it feels a little bit better here. There seems to be a kind of assist in moving the camera, but still a little hard to play. But I just like the box. It was in great condition. Seems like a good pickup. Going back to Bomberman, we have Bomberman on the N64. If you're in Japan and you like N64 stuff, very good condition, very cheap, in really all the places that I've gone. So this is basically Bomberman meets, I'm going to say Mario 64, but that's really not fair. It's basically just taking the Bomberman gameplay and putting it in sort of like a quasi 3D environment. It's puzzle solving. It's really not that great, to be honest, but I could see how it would have been interesting back when the N64 came out. It's not that you can't have fun with this, but it just it feels dated, and I just like regular Bomberman. So these attempts to modernize Bomberman don't necessarily work with me. Then we have Itadaki Street. Talked about this on the channel quite a bit a number of years ago. It's kind of like a Japanese Monopoly game, and this was nothing special, this particular version, but it was dirt cheap, maybe $1 or $2. So just like collecting that series. And this is a game I've always wanted to play. It's the Chocobo 10th anniversary, and it has the racing game. I think it has kind of like a Chocobo racing game, and I forget what the third one is. I only played the racing game, but I remember reading about this and saying, hey, I'd like to have this one day. It comes with a little art book, so I thought it was a good pickup. And then sticking with the PS1, I don't know what this is. This is Eve TFA. I'm not really sure about the origins of this game or what series it's based on, but it just had a nice box, and it has a nice little art book. Tried playing it. It's kind of like a point-and-click style game, as best I can tell. I think there's a music CD in here, so, sometimes you see these things. I mean, it maybe was $10, so figured it just looks nice, add it to the collection, and then, one day I can see if I can brute force my way through the story. I got a lot of PS2 games, and so here we have King of the Fighters 94 Rebout, and King of the Fighters 94, obviously classic, comes with a little character art book. Very hard. King of the Fighters 94, to me, is just a very hard game, and they didn't really do anything to make it any easier here. Nonetheless, I always said the PS2 is really a good system for those old school fighting games. They have some nice re-releases, nice compilation. Like I said, I hook up my Brook adapter, use the Vuelix fighting stick, and it's a good time, so happy to have picked that up. I said PS2 is coming up, but we have some PS4 games. First one here is, this is EX versus Extreme On Maximum version, and I think this one is supposed to have some sort of enhanced sound. It seems to be advertising different tracks and things like that. This is a robot combat game, seems to be bringing together a lot of the different Gundam from over the years. As someone who's not a Gundam fan, that's a little lost on me. I also feel like the soundtrack is very heavy, like rock and roll. I don't... Again, maybe those were themes from the show, but not super into it as far as the sound design goes. The gameplay is good. It's basically just an arcade-type fighting game, and it is... you could... It's so frenetic that I'm not always sure how I'm winning or losing, but it's just kind of robotic mayhem, and as such, it's a pretty fun game, and apparently this is a pretty desirable version of it. And then I got Rainbow Cotton. This is the special edition. I don't actually have the special edition box near me. This is a 3D version of Cotton, and I don't know what to think about this. It's kind of like you could call it sort of Space Harrier-esque, but in the modern world, and so it has those retro sensibilities. The art design isn't that great, but playing through it does convey a kind of retro feel, so I guess I like it, although I would just prefer the regular 2D Cotton, to be honest. Now we'll get into PlayStation 2 games. This is the Darkstalkers collection, continuing with the theme of good fighting game compilations. I was never a fan, necessarily, of the Darkstalkers series. I appreciated its art style. I appreciated that it was trying to do something different. But this has 4 or 5 different games, basically the whole series, I think. And it's pretty fun to play, looks good, so this was a good pickup. Sometimes when you're in Japan, you need to experiment, and that is what I did here with Smash Hit 2. I was like, oh, a tennis game. Anime tennis game. This is interesting. What it actually is, though, it's some kind of like story, but, or like an interactive movie, but you advance the story, as far as I can tell, through playing Patchy Slot. And it didn't necessarily look like that on the box, but, I mean, it's $2 or $3. I may try to go back into it and see if I can move through a little bit more of it, but Patchy Slot games are kind of boring, but you take a chance sometimes. Tetris Collection. I got this actually because my wife's a big Tetris fan, and I know these Sega Ages releases are pretty popular, so I figured why not get Tetris. Then we have Ultimate Muscle Max. This is an interesting one. I was never really a fan of this game. I mean, I like it because it's an Aki Corp wrestling game, and of course they were the ones who made the great WCW games on the N64. This series never clicked with me, and I have another one of these somewhere, but this was in good condition. It was a good price, and maybe it was about $15 or so, and I figured I'd give it a shot, and I actually like this one. I don't know if this is an earlier one, but the gameplay, to me, is more reminiscent of those N64 wrestling games. It's a little bit slower, it's a little bit more deliberate, so, like I said, perhaps this is an earlier version. I'm not sure. I know there were a number of these released in this era, so I'd have to go back and see where this falls, but nonetheless, pretty good game. So this is a game called J Phoenix, and I talked about this in my previous video. There are a million robot games, old mecha robot games, and they are dirt cheap. This was probably about $3. So I like to give them a try, and they tend to be pretty good. Like, they remind me in a lot of ways of Virtua On, in this case, with a little more story and a little more attention to upgradability, almost in kind of a quasi-Gran Turismo sense. The combat is basic compared to what you would find today, but for $2 or $3, I always say that these are worth a shot. I'm not good at rhythm games, but I've always liked Taiko no Tatsujin, and I didn't have the PS2, the Japanese PS2 version. I have the Drum Master one that they released here. Again, very cheap, and I always just enjoy these, so I figured I'd give it a shot. Then we have Full Metal Alchemist. This is a fighting game. To me, it's a Power Stone style fighting game. Just a kind of frenetic. Actually, no, I shouldn't say Power Stone, because the stages are kind of less 3D here. But it's that sort of non-precise, it's not a Street Fighter type fighting game. It's more in that Power Stone, Smash Brothers vein again. Very cheap, not a great pickup, but a game that was worth exploring for its low price. This game I picked up because it was everywhere I went. Every store I went to had Ridge Racer 5, and I just decided at one point, well, it's become emblematic of my journeys here because I just saw it everywhere. Not a bad game. I mean, I'm not a Ridge Racer fan per se, but again, another game that was extremely, extremely cheap. And then lastly, we have Ring of Red from Konami, and this is a strategy RPG set in a alternate universe, World War II. I don't know if it's in sort of a robotic steampunk version of Nazi Germany, but it feels like a lot went into this game. There's a big language barrier, and I haven't really been able to penetrate that language barrier at this point. I just think there's a lot to this game, but again, a very, very cheap game that I had never heard of, and it's one of those ones that, maybe I can come back to at some point. So there you go. Pickups from my recent trip to Japan. It is a ton of fun game hunting over there. It's the best game hunting in the world. I've done it here in the States, and here you find one or two stores depending on where you're going over there. It's just the city of Tokyo is your oyster if you enjoy looking for video games and otaku stuff, obviously. So I am looking forward to spending my holiday season digging deeper into this haul.